Fantasy friends, today I would like to get into some of the players who have been disappointing us thus far in the season, and some of the players who have just come out of left field to have incredible seasons. A very young season so far. Only the first 2 weeks have elapsed, so it's just good to get a radar of who's running hot, who's running cold. Let's get into our first group of people, and we're gonna have the cold dudes. We're gonna start cold, we're gonna finish hot, and hopefully we're gonna learn a thing or two. So let's start with our buddy boy, Alperen Sengun. Here's the problem. We are looking into an MPG, minutes per game situation. Alperen Sengun has all the potential in the world. The first game of the season, let's take a look at his box score. October 23rd, this dude kicked butt. 25 points, 18 rebounds, 5 assists, 4 steals, a block, hit 2 threes. Like, when you saw that first game hit, you are loving it if you drafted him, you are hating him if you didn't. Now, you are beating yourself up if you have Alperen Sengun, because you don't know what's going on. Number one, let's take a look, field goal percentage. It has been tanking. Not a good sign that he's shooting less field goals per game than he was last year, hitting it at a way lower clip. And then let's pair that with the minutes per game, MPG. That's the biggest problem so far. Homeboy is not getting the amount of minutes he should. If you saw the last game between Golden State Warriors and the Houston Rockets, you've got to see Alperen Sengun's body language on the bench. They mounted a huge comeback when they put in Tari Eason and Amen Thompson in lieu of going a more traditional big man route, which definitely hurt Alperen Sengun. But this dude's body language on the bench was insane. The beginning of the fourth quarter, the comeback was strong. It was good. Every time the Rockets hit a big shot, Alperen Sengun was hitting him with the muscles. He was pumped, getting happy. But as the game slowly progressed, closer to the end of the fourth quarter, Alperen Sengun was like, bro, I'm not in the game. And he went from pumped from shots hit to, and you could tell, even in the overtime, Alperen Sengun was not pleased. And if you're a fantasy owner, you're also not pleased. Alperen Sengun is running cold. I don't think this is a panic situation. I think this is an obvious wait and stay patient, simply because he is so talented. But the Rockets, it looks like Ime Udoka's going for W's, and he does not think your traditional big man is the route. So Alperen Sengun is the number one disappointment after having such a great start in the fantasy season. Let's go into his buddy at the point guard, Fred VanVleet, FVV. Really disappointing to start the season as well. Only hitting 12, 3, and 5.7. These are way, way, way lower than you expected for an FEV. Let's take a look at what's going wrong. Obviously, on the front of it, it is a situation of field goal percentage. He is hitting a measly 28.2% field goal percentage. That is just beyond abysmal. What is encouraging is that he has the MPG. He's hitting his 37. He's actually getting more minutes per game than he was last year, as opposed to Alperen Sengun, who's on a decline. So the minutes per game is there. I am less worried about a Fred VanVleet, simply because those shots will fall. He's a high variance dude because he shoots a ton of threes, and threes have a lower chance of going in than a two. And you can sort of see his 3-point percentage is the same as his regular field goal percentage, simply because he's shooting 8.8 threes a game compared to his 13 total field goal percentages. The bulk of them are 3-pointers. The assists, though, are slightly down as well at 5.7 per game, but you're pairing that with a turnover of 0.7. So his assist to turnover ratio is still roughly the same, but you need to see more assists, better field goal percentage, which will lead to more threes from an FVV. Also, the points are a little shy, but that's all pairing into the field goal percentage. Don't panic on FVV, but kind of a disappointing start to the season given how high he was drafted. Let's start into our next dude, who's sort of an honorable mention here, Bam Adebayo. His last game was actually pretty good. He finally put a good game together versus the Washington Wizards, where he had 32 and 14 decent percentages with the threes that we were hoping he would hit. But the first 4 games before that were dreadful. We are looking for Bam to have a huge step up this year. He's still a relatively young dude. 1997, crazy to see dudes that are this young in the NBA, and he's not even one of the younger guys. But Bam is having a very disappointing season. Last year he was 19 and 10 with about 4 assists per game. This year he's 15 and 8.6 with 3 assists a game. Blocks and steals are still looking good. Field goal percentage is down, which is a direct, a direct correlate for the point. So hopefully he can get his shots up, his field goal percentage normalized, and maybe hit a 3 a game and start to tick up. I'm not worried about a Bam, but he has had a slow start to the year. Let's continue on some of our friends who are dudding to begin the season. That is our friend from Brooklyn, Nick Claxton. This is another dude who is on a limits restriction. As you can see, the minutes are starting to tick up a little bit, but given what's going on with the Brooklyn Nets, who are depleted, these dudes are tankathon. You'd figure a dude like Nick Claxton would get a bunch of usage, a bunch of minutes, but it's just not coming through for Nick Claxton. Last year, he was about 12 and 10 per game with 2.1 blocks, obviously a lot more minutes. This year, even despite having a higher field goal percentage, he's taking lower frequency, less points per game, less rebounds per game, less blocks per game. You wouldn't expect a year like this for a dude like Nick Claxton, who signed a pretty big offseason contract, to have such a disappointing start, but this is another don't panic, maybe a buy low situation for somebody whose minutes should tick up more, but disappointing so far. Another guy who we're going to get into that I am not worried about is Luka Magic. Luka Doncic, the problem here is just field goal percentage. Let's take a look at it. 27, 8, and 6. For a normal person, that is wonderful, unbelievable. But for Luka, with such lofty expectations, that's sort of a dud to start. He was pretty much consensus number 3 overall pick for this fantasy draft. But not a guy you freak out on, just a guy who I have to mention simply because he is like a top 3, top 4 fantasy asset. Again, the problem is sub 40% shooting and sub 30% from 3. Everything else will click. I am not worried at all about our friend Luka, not even worth discussing, but we did anyway. Another early pick who we have to talk about is Victor Wembanyama. I personally had Victor projected for about 27 points per game, 13 boards per game, 4 assists per game, and 4 blocks per game. He is falling terribly short of that, with all of his numbers being lower than his rookie year. So another guy who I'm not terribly worried about, but somebody who you would like to see these games start to tick up and like, listen, we're talking about a dude that just had 5 blocks and 5 steals a game ago. So like, don't get it twisted. Wemby is still the dude, still such a rare fantasy asset who brings you returns that you just simply cannot get from a standalone single player. So I'm not worried about Victor, but another guy who I'm surprised that he is hitting a benchmark that's so below his rookie year, he's the dude. Wemby is unbelievable. You just got to warm up a little bit. Not worried at all. A guy who I may be a little bit worried about, who was drafted super early in the first round, is Tyrese Haliburton. What the heck is going on with TH? If you told me that at the beginning of the year Haliburton would have 14 and 7, I would tell you that that is a bald-faced joke and a bald-faced lie and not a funny thing to say to a fantasy owner. I own him across 2 leagues. I am disappointed, but you'll see the last 3 games he has gotten his double-double, but what hasn't clicked is the points here. Field goal percentage starting this year is 33% for a guy who's close to 50%. That's just a really bad start, but he's shooting. The volume is there. The threes are popping, which is good, but they're just not falling. I think this is another guy who things will start to fall, but another weird indicator, free throw percentages too. The guy's just not shooting. And also, he's just not getting his assists to the right clip. I really hope that this, this 14 and 7 ticks up pretty quickly. Simply since he was a pacer who was getting 20 and 10. This dude is a 20 and 10. You really would have liked him to see about 24 and 11, but you're just not getting those numbers. I hope that he isn't broken in some sense. It could be a USA basketball thing. We don't know. But what I do want to show you is the splits from last year. Let's take a quick look at Tyrese Haliburton. This is worth digging in a little bit because of how worried managers are. Let's take a look at the 2023 season. He got injured last year, and his end of the year post-January was a little strange. All-Star break, the guy was crazy. In the month of December, he was 14 assists per game with 21 points per game, 3 threes a game, just like stellar, a dude who is a total rock star worthy of a max contract. But you take a look at February and March, which are good months to focus on. Boom, he's down to about 16 and a half per game and 9 assists, which for a regular mortal, fine. But Tyrese Haliburton is supposed to be like a top 6, top 8 kind of pick. That's not cutting it if you take a look back here. And another indicator too, let's jump into the playoffs, just so we could see what he did in the 2023 playoffs. Let's go to summary 2023 playoffs, just so we could get a comprehensive picture and like, is this a theme that will persist? We do not know. So he was 18 and 8 with 1.3 steals and 3.5 threes in the playoffs. So really not hitting the numbers that you would want. And this is over 15 games. This is over a real, this is over a real sample size. So based on post All-Star break going into the postseason, these normalized numbers aren't those frothy numbers that Tyrese Haliburton was hitting at the beginning of last year. Maybe this hamstring situation is something that is really lingering, and he's either cautious or there's a mental block, or the dude got the bag and he's just not playing at the same level. Either way, I'm a little worried about Tyrese Haliburton. I don't think he's the same fantasy asset that he was in the past. Something to keep an eye on. Somebody else to keep an eye on, Miles Bridges. What the heck is this start to the season? 13, 7, and 2.3? Unacceptable numbers. I don't know what's going on here. But let's take a look at him comped over to last year. Big indicator I'm already seeing, minutes per game. He was flirting at 37, which is a ridiculously high clip. Now he's down to 30, and he was shooting 17 and a half shots per game, down to 12 and a half. Threes, he was hitting 2.3, now he's only hitting 1.5. Everything across the board is down, and I'm worried. This is a guy who you probably got in the, let's see, late 50s to mid 60s on your pick, and he's simply not returning that value. 13 and a half is not cutting it. A guy who I'm starting to get a little worried about here. Only shot 6 shots in the last game that Brandon Miller returned from. Although that is Boston, I wouldn't freak out too much because Boston is like a lockdown squad who is ridiculous. But Miles Bridges is somebody who is dudding so far. Jalen Duren, who I'm filming this as of Sunday, November 3rd. Detroit has already played Brooklyn, and I'm going to refresh this. So, oh yeah, here we go. His last game versus Brooklyn, actually not bad. Let's take a look at his game log. Not a bad game versus Brooklyn. He did 13 and 17. That's pretty much what you want from him, with blocks all around, but Brooklyn is a freaking joke. Let's just go into his numbers on this last game, and then let's compare it to what he's been doing so far this season. Nonetheless, a disappointment. He did 13 with 3 blocks and a steal, 17 rebounds, 4 assists. Really good, 5 for 5 in the field. That's awesome. This is the kind of game that you want from Jalen Duren. Dude has not been playing like this. He's a guy, third year, a big breakout candidate this year. And if you look at his year-over-year numbers, this is just not cutting it. The minutes per game are down, big disappointment. Shots per game, crap, what are you doing, bro? Free throw percentage is down, rebounds are down, effectively everything across the board is down, although he's getting 1.2 blocks per game, which is good, but this is a guy who you got for high field goal percentage and rebounds and hopefully a breakout candidate, but 8 and 8.5 is not cutting it. Hopefully he could pick up a little momentum after grabbing 17 rebounds in this last game, but so far this young season, Jalen Duren has been a dudder. Let's move over to Utah, which to me makes no sense that Colin Sexton isn't going for over 23 points a game. I think he does have a bit of an injury going on with an index finger, so that could be a big reason why he is not kicking butt so far. But Colin Sexton, 13 and a half, 2.3, 2.3, this isn't cutting it for a guy who should be killing it this year. Last year, he finished with a ton of momentum at the end of the season. Clearly a guy who's capable of putting up big points and decent assists, and it's just not happening this year. 13 and a half, 2 and 2 isn't it. It isn't it. Minutes are down across the board, which again doesn't make sense for a Utah team that is decimated and going for the tank. Like, let the guy play. Looks like it's not happening. Big disappointment. Maybe a guy who you want to hold on for another week, another 2 weeks to see what happens, but if things don't level out, he's a guy who you may have to drop to get a better asset moving forward. If there's like a Bilal Coulibaly on your waiver wire somewhere, I may be inclined to grab him and drop a Sexton. He's a guy who people were spending a decent draft pick. I know drafts where he was going as high as like Terrible pick, by the way, mid-60s. He should be a guy who is well into the 80s, 90s, simply because he doesn't have a rare category subset. He's points, he's assists, he's almost nothing else. Decent percentages for a guy who puts up points, but just a guy who's not cutting it, and in this young season continues to be a little bit of a disappointment. Another guy in Washington who you thought was going to do well and who is crap in the bed, Jonas Valanciunas. Let's take a look at Jonas. Let's get a little water break as we are really throwing the old mouth apart the place. But Jonas Valanciunas, 12-7 is not what you thought he would do on a Wizards team that has no one. They have no one, but he's doing nothing. He's kind of a warm body there. He's just not getting the usage. The minutes aren't there. The minutes are not there. Even on November 2nd against Miami, he got his lowest output of minutes per game, which doesn't make sense with a Kyle Kuzma out. Kuz is out, yet Jonas gets less minutes. It doesn't make sense. Washington is going to go to a youth movement. You mark my words. Who I think is in pretty good shape, and somebody who will mention a little bit later on the show is their wonderful point guard. Shouldn't be spacing on a name this early tonight, but Jordan Poole. Jordan Poole. Bluch, Jordan Poole in the brain, baby. But Jonas Valanciunas does suck. They're going to go to the youth movement. Jordan Poole is a guy who I think will persist. I think he'll have a very good season, but like maybe a Kuz, he's got a little bit of injury now. Does this become more of a big injury? We don't know, but Jonas, not part of the youth movement here. Somebody who I am worried about, a guy who's doing 12-7, who should really be doing upwards of, 15-9, 15-10, with close to a block a game, but that just ain't cutting it this year. He's a guy who's very, very, or at least leaning towards a very droppable guy. Another big who, I will say, there was lofty expectations over Zach Edey due to the fact that he was the front runner for Rookie of the Year, who I no longer think he is the front runner for Rookie of the Year. He did have his first ever double-double with 10-10, but Zach Edey has been a pretty disappointing player to begin the season. 9-5, not even close to what we thought Edey was going to get. I don't have much more to mention about Edey. He's just not getting the kind of usage that a lot of people thought he would get. Big expectations coming in, or at least medium expectations coming in. A lot of people used a pretty decently high draft pick. I faded him. Not that I faded him. I missed him in rounds that I was comfortable. I didn't want to get him in the 80s and 90s. I wanted to get him in the 100s, and he wasn't there when I wanted him, and you know what? It looks like it worked out so far. As the season progresses, we'll see if he starts to pick up the pace, but so far, Edey, another disappointment. One more disappointment we're going to talk about before we actually talk about guys who are pleasant surprises is Jonathan Kuminga out of Golden State. A guy who people thought was going to get, let's call it like 20-ish to maybe 20 to 24 points per game, especially with Klay Thompson gone. We thought that there would be a big usage vacuum, but he's a guy who's just not gotten the minutes, he's not gotten the shots, and he's just playing like crap. Maybe he's just a guy who isn't good. Maybe he's just not that good at basketball. Nothing here, there's no statistical relevance to say that this guy's the dude. When I ran my numbers last year on a Kuminga, I had him rated under a lot of guys. I had him rated under an RJ Barrett, who I picked way after a lot of people got Jonathan Kuminga, and a guy who's way outperformed Kuminga. I always consider Jonathan Kuminga to be the poorest man's version of an RJ Barrett, and it seems like that thesis is coming true. So Kuminga, bad start. Maybe he does tick it up as well, as he did have 23 points in the last game. Maybe it's just a bit of a slow start, but pretty bad start. Hopefully he picks it up. Let's get into some guys who are kicking butt. And this is it's nicer to talk about the good guys. So we gave the bad news first, and we'll give the good news second. Let's start at the top. Jalen Suggs. Here's a guy I just could not have predicted that Suggs would be the dude. Of course, it makes sense that Paolo Banchero's out, so it is helpful that Paolo Banchero's out, as that's when he really did start to tick up. But even the first few games of the season, the steals have been there, assists have been okay, but he's really turned up since the first two games. He's really turned it up. Hopefully he can keep this momentum up here. He's killing it in the steals and blocks, across the board assists with rebounds and threes. He looks a lot like, let's see if I can come up with a good comp for him. We'll see as we go through. Let's see if there's other comps I can come up with him. But the guy just looks freaking good so far with 18, 5.5, 4.5 assists. He's a top, I think he's a top 15 rated player thus far. He could be a really good sell high candidate, but you know, with Paulo down for a bit, here's a guy who could pick up a lot of the slack here. So I like Suggs a ton this year. A guy who's totally been killing it. A guy who I looked through his last year's stats. I looked through his college stats. I just didn't see him being this good of a player. If it persists, like, holy moly, people got Jalen Suggs deep into the 100s. And if you got him there, that's wonderful value. I have him in literally 0 of my leagues, unfortunately. But a guy who's just looking freaking great to start. Another guy who I want to mention here, Zubac. Ivica Zubac, he slowed down in the past couple of games, but 17.5 and 13, this could have totally gone either direction. In the past, they just did not give him a ton of minutes per game, but this LA Clippers team is decimated. There's just no one on this team. They have no freaking bench. James Harden is their best player, and he's like 45 years old. Zubac is really the benefit of just not having enough warm bodies on this team. He's 17.5 and 13 is a huge step up from the 11.7 and the 9.2 that he did in the previous season. The blocks are down. The field goal percentage is down a little bit, but the numbers are up here. The free throws are also down. With volume comes a little bit of a decline in the percentage. He's always been like a 60, 70-ish percentage guy, and that number's ticked down, but you'll take it for the 17.5 and the 13. The rebounds are definitely there. The points are variable. Had 9, 22, and 6 in the past 3, but here's a guy who there's just not enough. Again, there's not enough people on this team. He's been a really pleasant surprise to start the season. Let's get into another dude who is kicking butt. More of like an honorable mention, although he is still a top, I think he's still like a top 50, top 60 asset because those assists are crazy. Scottie Pippen Jr., he's a dude, if he gets minutes, he's just going to put up stats. He looks great. A guy who I never thought would have this kind of stat return to start this year. 3 games with double-doubles in the past 5 looks really good. Obviously, Bane not being there is a big benefit. But even if Bane comes back, there's still value here. He's not a dude who's freaking us out, but he's a dude who's doing very well and somebody to certainly keep an eye on. If he's out there on the waiver wire, he's a pickup for sure. SPJ. Let's get into Norman Powell, another dude on LA who, wow, a guy who I just did not expect to have this kind of season. 25 points per game, like, enough said. Enough said. So let's see, his threes per game are 3.7. So that's just stellar. And all at 50% from the field and 85% from the line. Doesn't give you much else here in the ancillary stats. Very low on the assists. Doesn't give you much on the defensive end. But for a dude who was a last round or very likely a pickup, to be, shooting 50% from the field, 85% from the line with almost 4 threes a game and 25 points is sick. Sick value. If you had him, you're happy. Let's talk about another guy who so many of the experts said Nikola Jokic is rooted, mate. This guy's done. Nikola Vucevic is doing okay. So let's talk about it. What is encouraging is the past 4 games, he's actually getting defensive stats. The first 2 games of the season, he got you no steals, no blocks, but the points and the rebounds have been there all season. Let's compare him year over year. Last year, he did 18 and 10 with just under a block and just under a steal per game with 1.2 threes per game at just under 50% from the field and 82% from the line. This year, his numbers are ridiculous. He's shooting more from the free throw and he's shooting 95%. Insane rate. He's shooting 55% from the field with 2.3 threes a game. The dude's freaking killing it. He's turned back the hands of time with 21.5 points per game, 11 rebounds per game, 3.3 assists, and you'll see, like I mentioned, I think he's starting to get a little bit loose because those blocks and steals are coming up. So Vuce, who has been, I think, a top 9 asset, I think he's 9 or 10th, maybe 11th overall ranked player, he's kicking butt. He's an old dude, but there's opportunity city here. Let's see what happens with the Bulls. maybe they're a team that's in contention for the play-ins, and he just runs through the full season, and he's a dude who's exactly who you wanted him to be. But a pleasant surprise. Many of the experts said fade Vuc this year. I faded him, and I'm a little upset that I didn't get him in the 50s where he was getting drafted in most leagues. So Vuc, good on you, my friend. Let's get into the really tough Toronto Raptor, R.J. Barrett, the local boy, killing it. He started the season injured, but the past 4 games, I mean, look at this. He started his first game in sub 30 minutes per game, 20 points, fine. But the past 3, 30 points per game, the assists are there, the field goal percentage is there, which we thought would be. Obviously, the free throw isn't great, and you know what? He's always been a high turnover guy, but it's never been paired with high assists. So to start the season, what a freaking pleasant surprise. Let's take a look at year-over-year stats. I know, small sample size, 4 games. We're getting freaked out early, but with no Scotty Barnes, there's just not enough bodies on this squad. So he's doing 28.8 with 5.8 rebounds, 7.3 assists. Will never get you much in the steals and blocks, but 3 threes a game and 49% from the field. Traditionally, in his first few years, really up until last year on Toronto, he's been a sub 45% shooter. But he's fixed his shot. A lot of the older guys in the league will tend to fix their shot, and he's a very young dude, born in 2000. He's a young buck. He's 24 years old. Players in the NBA tend to hit their prime at 27, so even though it seems like he's been in the league for a very long time, he was a very young dude coming into the league. So a ton of upside still, and he's playing great to start off. If you drafted him late, which I did in many of my leagues, you're really outperforming. So R.J. Barrett, big ups to you, my friend. Another guy in Brooklyn, let's talk about him. Dennis Schroeder, a guy who people grabbed in the last round. I grabbed R.J. Barrett and Dennis Schroeder very late in my $1,000 Yahoo League, and no surprise, I'm off to a pretty good start. I crushed it this week, and hopefully I can continue with the momentum. But Schroeder, with the exception of last game, he played today, November 3rd. Let me update this. The past 2 games have been a little weak, so maybe it is a super sell high here, because he started off the season a little weak with 13, but the other 4 games crushing it. And something to think about too here. I think this is getting excited a little too early. He's always been a sub, I think 45% field goal shooter. Yeah, and this year he's shooting 51.7. So I think that percentage is, not so sustainable. Also making 3.7 from the 3, 22 PPG with 8 assists relative to 2.7 turnovers and 1.2 steals. He's turning back the hands of time. He's the Schroeder with all the potential. You are seeing your potential actualized in Dennis Schroeder right now. He is the highest version of Schroeder, coming off a really good Olympics as well. I still like Schroeder. Last 2 games versus Detroit and Chicago, it's Midwest teams. Cut him some slack. Nobody's excited to play the Midwest teams. Not so hot, but I still think he's got a lot in the tank here. If he still gets his shots up, he'll be fine. If he hits his threes, he'll be fine. But Schroeder has been outperforming thus far. Maybe a sell high candidate if you could get a top 50 asset for him. He's been crushing it, but definitely kicking butt so far. Let's talk about his running mate in Brooklyn, Cam Thompson. Here's a guy who I projected for 25, 4, and 4 assists per game. He's at a monstrous 28 PPG. Let's just refresh this. I know he played today. I think he did like 17 PPG. His 2 worst games this season have been 17 and 19 points. He's not getting you much else in the way of stats. Although the these steals have been okay. He's not getting you blocks. The assists are, below average. The turnovers are pretty much matched with the assists, which isn't terribly efficient. Not getting you many rebounds, but he is a high volume free throw shooter, which helps if your league has free throw percentages, and most standard leagues do. And he's not killing you from the field. He's 44%, pretty consistent across the board. A lot of times guys with volume actually comes a higher field goal percentage unintuitively, because they're getting the kind of reps, they have the kind of confidence that they need. So if he could hover around that 44-45, that's pretty decent. He's not murdering you, and he is getting you 3 threes per game, and that 91% from the stripe is ridiculous. Is it an anomaly? Is it a fluke? Not really. He was 87% 2 years ago and 86% last year, so these aren't crazy numbers. If he could keep his numbers high at like 25 points per game, he's a total valuable guy who is doing, I think, way better than people's expectations. So Cam Thomas, very good job, my friend. Here's a dude who has I never saw this coming. Makes zero sense to me, but whatever. Buddy Hield. Like, bro, what are you doing? Buddy's killing it. Buddy's making 5 threes a game, shooting 50% from the field. Like, is that unsustainable? Maybe. But what the hell, buddy? Bro, that alone, doing 22 points per game with 5 threes a game, 50% from the field, and 90, although low volume, 90% from the free throw line. Like, bro, buddy, what the heck, bro? Where'd you come from? I have 0 shares of Buddy. He was off my radar. I just felt like after so many years of bouncing around from team to team and being relegated to a bench role, like, Buddy was spent, but Buddy's got a lot left in the bank. So, man, if you have Buddy, you're doing okay. Damn, Buddy boy. Didn't see it coming, but one of these early season surprises. There's so much randomness in the league, and Buddy's enjoying it. Another guy in Toronto, Grady Dick. Dick. He is dicking people down. This is another byproduct of Scotty Barnes being injured, and Grady Dick is stepping in to fill the void. Grady Dick is filling the hole. That's what's happening here. 22, 31, and 30 in his past 3 games. And homeboy's looking good. He's hitting threes. Not a really high field goal percentage. Although 46 isn't bad if you could keep those numbers up. The last game, 35. But I think that's more of I think he'll still be a mid-40 shooter with close to 3 threes a game. Guy could shoot 92% from the free throw. Good. Doesn't get you much else. He's a lot of these. He's an empty statter. You don't want to stack too many of these guys where you have like a Norman Powell, where you have a Cam Thomas. Like if you have too many of those guys on your team, you're just concentrated with points and not much else. But if you sprinkle some of these guys in and you have other people that can pick it up where you could get some steals and blocks and rebounds, that's a really nice pairing. He's a guy who's just putting up stats that I just didn't think we'd see from a year or two in Grady Dick. So good job, Grady Dick. I think he'll still be keeping it up until Scotty Barnes is back. And even when Barnes is back, maybe Dick can sustain some value here. Let's go into another guy who is in his second year. That is a French phenom, Bilal Coulibaly. Okay, so Kyle Kuzma is out, so I think Bilal is grabbing a couple extra shots, but even when Kuz was in, the MPGs are there. First game of the season, 29, 30 points per game, but everything else after that has been hovering around 35, around that 35 minutes per game mark. Washington, it's a youth movement. Him and Jordan Poole are going to be huge beneficiaries of that. So, you take a look at Bilal. When you match his points with the field goal percentage and with sort of out-of-position rebounds, you're in good shape here. Let's see if he can keep it up with the steals. But Bilal Coulibaly could be one of these really massive early season pickups. I picked him across pretty much everywhere in my league and feeling pretty good about a Bilal. This could be a guy who could be a top 50 if he could sustain this value, and it seems like it's somewhat possible. Let's see what he's doing this year. 19, 6, 2.6, 1.2 steals, 2 threes a game, 60% from the field. Just not going to happen. It's not going to happen. But like maybe it's 50% from the field. He hits a lot of layups. He's like a threes, back you down, kind of like within the free throw and closer jump shooter and layups and putbacks. I think he's getting, if you take a look here, pretty good offensive rebounds for a small. Gets his defensive rebounds, just like a really, really good player who, if he has a good field goal percentage, he could win you some leagues. So I'm feeling good about a Bilal. Let's talk about Jordan Poole. Here's the thing where Jordan Poole is killing it. Maybe it's unsustainable. It's 2 things. It's field goal percentage and it's steals. Let's take a look at his field goal percentages here. Traditionally, he's a sub 45% shooter, but this year he's up to 46 and he's getting 2.8 steals a game. Let's just get out and say it. I don't think that's sustainable. He's never been a big steal guy before. Steals are one of the highest variable categories in fantasy basketball. So I think a lot of his value is going to go by the wayside as the steals start to tick down. But still, the 5.4 assists are decent to 22 points per game. And the 46 is crazy. And the 4.4 threes are wonderful. The 94% at decent volume is also crazy. I think he's going to cool down a little bit, but the free throw percentage has always been there. Field goal percentage, I think, is running hot. The steals are insane, but if he keeps that up, like, holy crap, you hit a freaking jackpot. So I think he's been an early season surprise. Sustainable, probably not, but definitely an early season surprise. Another early season surprise. DeMar DeRozan, didn't think he'd be putting up the same numbers as he did last year, especially in a crowded Sacramento squad. You have a lot of people who want the ball there, and he's been able to carve himself out the same role he's always had. He's just like a total enigma. Holy crap. The guy was born in 1989, and he's playing like he was born in 1999. It's crazy what DeMar is able to do. One other element here, much like Jordan Poole, the steals are unsustainable. In this early season, he's averaging 2.3 steals. Once that goes, his value will get cut in a quarter. But doing everything else that he's always been able to do, 25 points per game, 4.5 rebounds per game, just about 4 assists per game, with wonderful percentages. 52% from the field, 85% at high volume from the free throw line. Here's one thing that you will never see with DeMar DeRozan, and that's threes. If he could shoot threes, it would be a total freaking game changer. But here's a guy who I thought we were looking at 18, 4 and 4, and he's just crushing those expectations. The value will go down as the steals go down, but in a crowded Sacramento squad, he is just elbowing his way in, and he is making his stats be known. So very impressive, DeMar. This guy is a chameleon. He can just be whatever he is on any squad. So it's just so impressive. Didn't think he would be able to grab the usage. So very nice, DeMar. Let's go to Boston. Peyton Pritchard, bro, where the hell did you come from? I grabbed Peyton Pritchard in my league after another manager dropped him, and I'm just thrilled. And even Jaylen Brown didn't play the last game. He's not going to play the next game. Peyton Pritchard is a dude who is just a walking bucket. If you watch him out there, he's so confident. He does the step-back threes. And even on November 1st, when he wasn't hitting his threes, he got you 5 steals. He's awesome. He is a top fantasy asset, and I don't see there being a path to him not getting minutes throughout the season. Boston is deep. They want to spread a little bit of the time and the usage. Drew Holiday is on the decline. Everybody knows it. Even Porzingis, when he comes back, they're going to baby him. There's no point in putting Porzingis into the fire. Let him go on a nice low and slow, tick him up a little bit in the playoffs when they really need him. But you could use Peyton Pritchard as a total workhorse. No reason not to. Out of nowhere, almost 16 points per game, 3 assists per game, 1 turnover per game, 1.3 steals. He should be able to keep that up, I think. And he's hitting 4.1 threes per game. It's just crazy what this guy is doing from the three. So Peyton Pritchard, really good value to start off the season. Came out of nowhere, but really coming pretty hard. Peyton Pritchard, oh yeah. I have a Jaden Ivey here. I almost don't know why. I kind of do know why. He didn't do so well tonight versus the Brooklyn Nets, and the past 2 games haven't been good. Maybe this is him cooling down, but he had a pretty good start to the year, and I had Jaden Ivey here simply because there was a surprise. There was a surprise in the sense of you have someone like a Jalen Duren, who I thought was going to be the next dude up on that squad, and a Tobias Harris, who was coming in there. I thought he was going to be the next dude up, but it looks like Jaden Ivey is grabbing the minutes, and he's grabbing the shots. Versus New York is a really good team. New York's a great team, so we could scratch off an anomaly kind of game here. Even in a game against Brooklyn, 35 minutes per game, 15 shots. They didn't fall. They should fall. And he's a dude who's just actually putting up pretty good across-the-board stats. He's getting you assists, not at a big clip, but he's getting you some assists, and he is getting you a steal per game. And it's a nice jump after having a couple years where you thought you had the potential and you sort of wrote him off last year. But he's getting his shots up, 47%, 2.3 threes, which is really nice. Free throw percentage, I don't think will ever be good. He's a 75% free throw shooter. Not great rebounds, mediocre assists, but if he could be near that 20 points per game, here's a guy who you picked up off the bench for 20 PPG. For now, he's kind of like a medium guy, not somebody who you're freaking out about. Let's talk about one last dude, and there are other people to mention. I just can't name everyone. These are the players who I think are just doing pretty exceptionally well. So let's get into the last dude. That would be Christian Brown. Christian Brown looks like Braun, sounds like Brown, looks like pretty good. So what we like from Christian Brown, which we didn't think he could sustain, is the defensive stats. The blocks are there, the steals are there. I think he'll be pretty much close to 1 block, 1 steal per game. just under 15 points per game with 5 rebounds, 2 assists, and just good percentages. Probably a little better in a roto than a head-to-head with all the percentages, but he's going to be a 50% dude from the field. Will he be able to sustain the free throw percentage? Historically, he's been closer to 60 or 70. Now he's like 88, so I don't know. But what is encouraging is the minutes per game. Much like other teams in the league, there's just no players on Denver like Christian Brown, Russell Westbrook, kind of a historical winner and a historical bonehead. Like, you want to find minutes for Christian Brown. There's just not enough heads on that team. And Christian Brown will consistently get 35-ish points per game. Not a high-volume guy, but he'll be efficient. He'll get you a block and a steal. And, if he's like the worst guy on your team, you're in pretty good shape. So there we have it. We've got some duds. We've got some studs. We've got some tricks. We've got some treats. We've got some winners. We've got some losers. Hopefully you learned a couple things. Hopefully you enjoyed it. I will catch you on the next one. I believe tonight I'm going to put together something pretty interesting with tracking your stats versus your entire league to tinker some things. So look out for another video later. But until now, until then, until now, until in the future, in the past, I will catch you, my friends. Take care.